So in my presentation, I talked about Smartcuts, which is the name that I use for when companies or people find an alternate route to accomplishing a goal. It's different than shortcuts in that shortcuts can be sort of amoral. They could be cheating or they could be cutting corners. Smartcuts sometimes are actually a longer path, but they take a shorter time. The main idea is that if you do things differently than the way people expect you to, you can often accomplish incredible things, and the breakthrough success comes from rethinking the rules or the assumptions that conventionally people give you when you're attacking a problem. So people always use these terms like thinking out of the box, or they say we're innovative or we're creative. The idea with Smartcuts is it's based on something psychologists call lateral thinking, which is that if you're trying to solve a problem, rather than going the straightforward approach, you sort of throw out the questions and you ask new questions and you come in from a sideways approach. Thinking outside the box is a term that kind of originated from that idea a couple decades ago, based on this puzzle where in order to solve it you had to draw a line outside the box and then come back. But really that term is so overused that people, they just kind of throw it out there. The thing that I write about is how do companies actually do that kind of outside thinking? And there's patterns to it. Some of the ways that I describe in my writing is actually based on rejecting the common wisdom that people give, so that you have to pay dues in order to be successful, or that mentorship helps, or that fail fast, fail often is important, or that progress must be incremental. Some of these conventions that people have actually slow down progress, and it's counterintuitive because we say, well, hey, having a mentor is a great thing. When you look at the research, there's times when it's extremely helpful and there's times when it actually hurts. And so by stepping back and saying, well, let's just not assume that anything is true, that's the idea behind lateral thinking, which is a little different than sort of the, let's do something crazy, let's make the color purple instead of blue, which is what people usually say for out of the box or creative. So I talk about this game that's an analogy called Bigger or Better, where kids will knock on people's doors and trade small objects for slightly bigger objects until they turn a toothpick into like a television set. With the idea being that if you are, the traditional advice is that you should climb the ladder straight forward and you should trade what you have for something bigger, get a promotion or whatever, but it's sometimes faster to move into a different industry rather than staying in your same industry and then move back. But I mean, it's something that you can also lose when you play this game too. It's, the idea is that in my talk I talk about this game as an analogy for not thinking that your next step must be straightforward, but sometimes it should be sideways. But obviously sometimes that is the wrong choice too. It's one of several patterns, 9 patterns actually, that I talk about in my book for different methods that companies sort of beat the ceiling. What happens is most businesses stop growing after a few years statistically, and most people get to a point in their careers where they can't go any higher. And you see in government where there's some problems that we just can't come together to solve, and so we assume that things just must take a long time and we have to wait and be patient. What I write about is how different companies and different causes managed to not be patient, and what they did, and this idea of bigger or better or sort of sideways ladder climbing is one of those principles, but there's a lot of other sort of methods that you see throughout history that work. These are really long answers, I hope that's okay. Yeah, so the company I founded is called Contently. It's based on my career in journalism as a freelancer. The problem that you're seeing in a lot of countries, especially in the United States, is that media companies, publishers, magazines, newspapers are laying journalists off from their jobs, then hiring them back as contractors or freelancers. But for freelancers, this is tough because you suddenly have to be a salesperson, you have to get people to pay you on time, you have to do your own taxes, you have to market yourself. So all those things are really difficult and have nothing to do with whether you're a great journalist. So we started a company to help journalists solve those problems, to help them get work, to help them market themselves, and to get them paid on time. And in doing so, we ended up building technology that helps publishers find talent, so find freelancers to hire, but also manage editorial workflow. So a big use case for us is when a company like Coca-Cola wants to do an online magazine. What they need to do that is they need technology for a process to manage the editorial, and then they need talent. And so we provide them with access to freelance journalists who are from big publications, newspapers, magazines, with all this data about what the journalists are good at. And then we give them tools to do project management, to make sure that compliance, so that Coca-Cola's lawyers are satisfied and everything's okay before they publish stuff. So that's the business that we created. The idea is empowering sort of future publishers to do a better job at publishing and to give them the people and the tools to be successful. So branded content is a really interesting field right now because there's so much change happening, and people are asking, is this going to disrupt traditional media, or will it ever sort of get out of the realm of PR? What you see when you look at history is for over 100 years, brands have been making their own magazines to help their customers be successful. John Deere, which is a tractor company in America, started a magazine in the 1890s to help their customers be better farmers, knowing that if their farms succeed, then they'll buy more tractors. So this thing has been around for a long time. The thing that will make it successful ultimately is if brands can get their minds around the idea of creating content that helps people rather than tricks people or convinces them to buy something. I guess the more altruistic approach is going to be better for brand building. I think the branded content industry survives when brands meet people on their own terms. So what you've seen with social media is people now have all this power to choose what content they get. Whereas before, an editor chooses for you what you're going to read. You open the newspaper and someone has picked that content for you. Now, because we all read our newspapers on Twitter and in Facebook, we choose the people we follow, we choose the content we click on. So in order to be successful as a content creator, you have to figure out what people actually want and give that to them. So I think branded content turns into this industry where brands are acting more like traditional publishers, talking less about themselves, unless the people ask for you to talk about themselves. But it's really interesting. I think the next few years we'll see a lot of change. I think media companies stand to gain a lot in consulting for these brands, or helping them produce content, or helping those brands find audiences where media companies have hugely loyal audiences because they give people what they want. And brands can pay those media companies to partner, and I think that's really interesting for the future of that business. We filter the journalists. We only work with journalists who have been published by major publications, but we also do a lot with data. So one of the things we do is we help a journalist build their online website. So if it's really hard to be a programmer and a journalist at the same time, so we help journalists build their websites, and in doing so, we collect data on what you write about, how well it does in social media, how big of publications you write for, what categories, what topics. And in that, we can help smartly match people that are appropriate and professionals to the right companies. But yeah, we're not interested in amateur writers. We'd love those writers to become professional writers and then join us, but we work mostly with people who've been laid off from, say, Time magazine, or who are freelancing on the side of a newspaper that they write for. I chose to come to DLD Women because I love the DLD folks. The folks at Borda have been really inspiring to us at Contently, and especially as we look at going into Germany, this is one of those places where the smartest minds in this area come to collaborate. But also, DLD is one of those places where if you get invited, it's an honor just to be here. So of course I couldn't say no.